Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, my name is Alex. And today we're going to talk about testing third-party APIs using Spring Boot and WireMock. Testing those APIs can be a little bit tricky because you can't control them. But luckily there are tools out there which we can use to mock or stub API behavior. One of these tools is WireMock, and I've been using it for many months now. So in today's tutorial, we're gonna pick a third-party API and then stub it using WireMock. And this is really just a high-level introduction to WireMock. There's so much more that you can do with it, but that will be part of the upcoming tutorial. So with that said, let's code. As usual, let's take a look at the dependencies. So you can see I'm working with a milestone release today, which is Spring Boot 3.2.0. And the reason is that I'm going to use the new REST client that has recently been added. So previously you could either use the REST template or the web client. And it was quite cumbersome if you wanted to use Spring Web and then bring in the web client, which is a reactive library. So now there's kind of the in-between, which is the REST client, which you can use using Spring Boot Starter Web. Other than that, I have the test implementation for WireMock. As of this video, this is also the most recent version. As the example today, I picked a free API, which is the Rick and Morty API, and it shows that because it's fun to use, it seems, it's well documented, and we don't need to sign up. So what we're going to do here is check the documentation. You can see it has support for characters, locations, and episodes. We will just look at the episodes today. It supports GraphQL as well as REST. We're going to focus on REST for today. So let's check the locations. What we want to do is get all the episodes, and this is what it's going to look like. So we can see it has some metadata. Because the API supports pagination, we can request a certain page, which is what we're going to do. And then we will see the results. And they contain the ID, the name, the air date, the episode, the characters, the URL. So let's start mapping that out in code. So we go back to the IDE and start with the first implementation of the service. Rick and Morty. I make that a component. So this is the service that's taking care of getting the data from the API. And as I said, we want to use the REST client. So we have to expose that to the Spring context first. So I'm adding a new bean, which is the client. We request the REST client builder, and then we just return builder build. And if you've been using the web client before, this API should look very familiar to you. So this is how we can add it. Let's go back to the service. Then we can request that dependency. Client is REST client. So we also will need access to the base URL of the API. So I'm modeling that using properties. So I have a data class, Rick and Morty properties, and that just has the URL. I could also use the add value annotation, but I'm more a fan of using configuration properties. So configuration properties, API, and then we enable them here. Enable configuration properties, Rick and Morty. So now we can just add them here. Private properties. That looks correct. And there's an error here. I need the REST client. Need to import that. And we're good to go. So the first thing I usually like to do is mutate the existing REST client that we're giving. So I'm using the name HTTP because it's easier. And we do client mutate, and then change the base URL. Put in the URL from the properties that we're going to set in a minute, and then use that copy of the client going forward. And the reason being is that I usually prefer configuring the client, web client or REST client in that case, just once, and use that to interact with multiple APIs that may have different endpoint URLs. But it's not required. We could as well use the client as is. Now there is the function to get all of the episodes. So we also keep pagination in mind. So I'm gonna go with this one. And before we get to what this looks like, let's start with modeling the API responses as data classes. So I have one data class that's an episode, and we are interested in the ID and the name of the episode, and the episode. So this looks pretty much the same. What's the difference between name and episode? If we go back here, you can see the name is, essentially it should be, where is it? Get a single episode. Where are the properties? We have them here, I think. Name of the episode, which is actually the title of the episode. And then episode is the code. So that may be something like this. Season 1, episode 1. So we want to have that as well. Since the API is returning a collection, I also model the collection, which I just called episodes. And that has results, which is a list of episodes. And now we can model that here. So we can return a list of episodes, make that optional, return HTTP. Now let's actually build the request. And again, this is just the same API as you would know from the web client. So we do get, and we can build the URI. Usually like to do it like this. So the path segment is, I think it's episode, not episodes. Let me check. Yeah, here it says episode. So this is a path segment, and then that's a Fluent API. So we can just call query parameter, which is page. And that's the page that we have here. It defaults to 1. We want to override that. And now let's build that. Okay, something's quite not right. Let's check that. So it's HTTP get. Let me finish this, and then we might see what the error is. So I'm going to go with retrieve. The body should be episodes class. And we want to get the results, which is the list of episodes. Oh, it looks nice. So brief recap. We pass in the base URL, which we have yet to configure in our properties. And then we perform the GET request. The URI is to the base URL and then /episode. And then it's the query parameter page, which we pass in here. So now let's go to our application properties. And then we have to specify API URL equals HTTPS. Let me actually copy that over. It's this one. Yep. There we go. API. So I remove the trailing slash. This is the API URL. So this should already work, and we start testing this directly. So let's go to our test here. This is just still an ordinary Spring Boot test. And what we can do here is we can request auto-wired, and then we do private late init var. The API, which is our Rick and Morty service kind of. I need to import that. So now let's check if that works. Well, episodes equals API episodes. We just leave that blank because it defaults to 1. And let's just print them, shall we? We do episodes for each. It's nullable for each print line. And now let's run the test. So let's check what has happened, and we can see this has worked, right? So we're getting all of the episodes starting with episode 1, season 1, episode 1. That's a pilot, and we have 20 episodes, so we get 20 results per page. So this test obviously uses the real API, but we want to now stop that response so we don't depend on the API being available. So here's what we do. We add a new resource in test, and we need a new directory for resources. And then we need another directory, which is called mappings, because that's the default location that WireMock is going to use. And then let's call the file episode JSON. So let me copy paste something here. So this is a mapping file, and the mapping file is used for WireMock so that we can specify that certain requests matching certain criteria will get a predefined response. So we can see we're building the request here. So what we tell WireMock is that whenever there's a request, like a GET request to the path/episode, and has the query parameter set, a page set to 2, then we will return the response below. So this will only match if page is 2, right? So if we type page equals 1, that wouldn't work, although there are wildcard parameters that we could have used as well. So, and now we model the response that we were returning. So it's HTTP 200 status code. The content type is application JSON, and now we can specify the JSON body here. I bring in the whole example for page 2. So this is what it looks like. So it's 20 results again. You can see we're starting on page 2. We know that because it says the previous page is page 1 and the next one is page 3. And then we can see that we again get 20 results, and we're starting with season 2, episode 10. It has all the characters linked here. We don't care about them. But this is how we actually specify a mapping. So we say this is the request, and the response is this data here, which is what we would expect from the real API, right? So how can we configure our test that it's now using WireMock? So we go back into our test, and then there's an annotation that we can use, which is WireMock test. And now we can also specify a port, which I like to do. Can also be random port, I guess, but like to keep this static. So I'm using port 8081. So this enables the WireMock server. And now we also have to make sure that our Rick and Morty service is using WireMock directly and not the external API. And we do this by overriding this property here. So in our resources, I provide a new file, which is application-test properties. So this is a property file that will be enabled whenever the Spring active profile equals test. That's not the case yet. We can change that by going down here. So whenever tests are executed, we pass a new environment variable and we say Spring profiles active test. So whenever we are running tests now, we do activate that profile, which in turn picks up that property file here. And now let's copy this over. So instead of the real API, we're not using HTTPS. This goes to localhost 8081. And that's all that we care about. We don't have to specify API here or anything because our test only checks for the path, which is /episode. So it doesn't care about what comes before. So now we are using WireMock already because now the requests are performed against WireMock. And now let's see if that still works. Let's just quickly run the test and see what happens. So we can see that it fails. Let's just check what has happened. Query doesn't match. You can see this is coming from WireMock. It's very explicit. It says, okay, it expected this, which is the closest step, the request to episode page 2, because there's just one step that we provided, right? The mapping file. And everything that it did in the mapping file can also be done in code if you want to have more flexibility. But I really like to have these JSON files because I find them easier to manage. So you can see our request actually went to page 1, which is the default. So let's change that here and request page 2. And then let's run the test again. So this looks similar to what it used to look before, right? We can see the 20 results. This time we are using our stub. So if I go to the episodes here and change this one, the wedding, just foo because I'm not that creative. Let's run the test again. So now the first episode has that name. So let's check that again. So we can see it has worked. So this is definitely using our provided result here. And now we can extend the test if we really want to. So let's go back to the test. Let's just add a few assertions to round up that example. So first of all, we can assert a throws, and this is HTTP client error exception not found, right? So if you specify a page, let me finish that first. So API episodes, yeah, 3 just works, right? We only mapped page 2. So page 3 will not work, and WireMock will return a not found error here. So this will be the first thing. And now let's also test the happy case in here. So we get the episodes. We know that this works because we've done it before. Let me go back to this one and change it back to what it was before. So we can just copy the title and then go back to the test and then run a few assertions. So assertions, assert, not null. That's the first thing because that could be nullable, right? Episodes. So now we know the episodes are not null. And then let's run another one. Assert equals 20 is the episode's size. We can actually enforce this here because we know it's not null. And then one more, assert equals the wedding squares is the name of episode's first name. That should be it. We don't need the print line here. So let's run the test again and see if it works. That looks good. So yes, it didn't match. This is just the same information we got before, but the test still succeeds because this results in the exception that is being thrown here. We expect that already, so it's part of the test. And then we just confirm that the response is what we would expect. And that's pretty much it. There's so much more to WireMock, and we might cover this in different tutorials. For example, even validating post requests and the likes. But for today, it's a wrap. Thanks so much for watching. Consider subscribing, and I'll see you on the next one.